Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what time zone you're on. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. My name is Kelly Kay. I'm the MVP lead at Microsoft for Power BI, also a Power BI community manager, and I look after webinars and user groups as well. Today, we have the pleasure of the amazing Ted Patterson, who I'm very proud to say we hired here at Microsoft recently. Ted has been a MVP for 12 years on SharePoint and 3 years on Power BI, and now we have him in the customer advisory team. And Ted has kindly offered to do a DevCamp series for us once a month. This is the first session, and now I'll just hand it over to Ted. So thanks again, Ted.
Thanks, Kelly, very much. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited about this new webinar series, Power BI DevCamp. This is our very first session. I want to quickly kind of point out a particular portal that we have here. Let's say that I just kind of quickly go over to this particular portal here. So, what I'm trying to show here is that, for each one of these sessions that we have, we basically have a little page for it. For instance, if you want the PowerPoint slides, if you want the tutorial, and we have a nice big long tutorial that you can go through. And if I go ahead and just kind of open this thing up with Word so I can kind of show you what it looks like, it's basically about 37 pages of just stepping through and kind of doing what I'm going to be doing here. So once again, there's other pointers to some of the code samples and to a couple different other resources that we have there. Okay, let me go ahead and move back to our slides.
Yeah. And hey, Ted, we're going to have the links in the community there, right? So I think you and Sandy and I are going to set up an area to have that in the community, I think. So I'll pop the links in there at the end of this call.
That would be great if you could just go ahead and put those into the chat for everybody.
Awesome.
Okay, so what we're going to work through now is basically, let me just kind of introduce the tutorial. So we're here for Power BI development, and one of the big areas in Power BI development is Power BI embedding. So for those of you who might not have worked with Power BI embedding, let me just give a real quick overview. So you create a browser-based application. And one of the things that your application has to do is it has to interact with Azure AD, maybe to authenticate the user, maybe to authenticate the app with an app-only identity, and get an access token. And we need an access token because we have to call the Power BI service to get embedding information. For instance, I want to embed a report. So I need the GUID for the report ID. I need something called an embed URL. I need some type of security token. And the idea is we pass all that information to the browser, and it's a 1-2 punch. So the first punch is going to the Power BI service, getting what you need, passing it back to the browser. The second punch is writing client-side code in JavaScript or maybe TypeScript that actually does the embedding and takes the data and behind the scenes creates an iframe. And what's kind of neat is after you've done this dance and you've done the embedding, your report is connected from your custom web page right to the Power BI service. So if someone clicks on a bar in a bar chart or clicks on a slicer, the interaction doesn't go through your application. It's directly between that report and the Power BI service. Now, also, there's 2 types of embedding. I've given a lot of talks on embedding, so I'm not going to go into all the details that I've gone into before. But user owns data embedding is when you authenticate the user and you use the user's access token to talk to the Power BI service. And it means that every single user, needs a Power BI license. If your content is in a dedicated capacity, it could basically be a free license for Power BI. And if it's not, it has to be a pro license. Now, there's another model, which is called app owns data, which is popular with ISVs because you can reach users that don't have any Power BI license and are completely unknown to Microsoft. Now, in our tutorial today, what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate on the user owns data sample. Now, what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and move back here. And what I'd like to do is go into my samples, and I'm going to take this one particular sample, which is the user owns data sample. And here's a sample that I just want to run for a minute just to kind of show you what the application is going to do. Here's what we're working to build for the next hour. So basically we're going to run this application. And so we want to have a nice sign-on experience for the user. So the user signs on and we say hello to the user. And then what the user is going to do is go to this one particular page. Now, let me just go on a tangent and go over just through the Power BI service. And you can see that I have a personal workspace, and it's got a couple different reports. We've got a couple different workspaces here. So when we use this application, one of the things that we should be able to do is give the user the chance to move between the different workspaces that user's in. And then once the user gets there, allowing the user to, go to open reports, to take a report that, has already been created and kind of go into edit mode, and also to create new reports. So that's what this application is going to do. This demo goes a little bit further, where it's also possible for you to create a new workspace. Okay, it's a Thursday afternoon, so perfect time to create a workspace named Bob. So the application allows us to create a workspace and to even upload some sample content. So now when we go to this brand new workspace that has just been created, your custom app can basically do all the work to create workspaces and add content behind the scenes, for your particular users. Okay, so what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through and kind of show you a quick demo of what we're going to be building. But now here's the tutorial. Now there's another GitHub repository, github.com Power BI DevCamp /netcore user owns data tutorial. If you just go to that one site, the link's there. But the idea is that there's either a Word document or a PDF file, and you'll open that up and you'll start working through our particular lab. Okay, now here's the flow of the exercises that we're going to go through. Exercise 1, we're going to create a new .NET Core web application with MVC. We're going to implement user login with this new neat library, Microsoft.Identity.Web. We're going to call the Power BI service. We need to add some JavaScript code to embed the report. And as we get to exercises 5 and 6, we're going to say JavaScript's just not cool enough. I'd rather program in TypeScript. So we're going to have to add support to our .NET project so that we get the benefits of being able to program in TypeScript and get things like compile time type checking and basically strong typing that goes way beyond what we can get with JavaScript. Okay, so that's our mission. Also note that when you do this project, one of the things that we have you do is, if I come back here, there is a particular link. I'm going to go ahead and copy that link. And now if I basically go to the browser window and I'm going to paste that link in, I wanted to give you the files that you need on your machine, which is called the student lab files. And if I now go and I'm going to kind of be doing the lab and just see DevCamp, the idea is that when you work with a PDF file, you can copy and paste code out and put it in. And for some people, it's a wonderful experience. And for other people, it's horrible because the line breaks aren't there. So anything that you need to copy and paste, there is a text file here in the student files, for you to be able to use. Okay, so now let's get into, our first exercise and the first topic, which is developing with .NET Core. Now, the first thing we have to do is we have to install the .NET Core SDK. It installs the .NET Core runtime. It installs some developer project templates. And once we've installed the SDK, there is this new command line utility, which is called .NET, .NET, and we're going to be able to run that, and we're going to be able to, create a new particular application. Now, before we get into it, there's one more really important developer concept in .NET that if you've never done .NET Core before, you might not understand, and that's dependency injection. So the idea of dependency injection is that there's a set of services that you'd like to use, but you don't have to go track down, find the service or find a class and create an instance of it. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the constructor and we're just going to basically add a parameter of a specific type. So the way I like to think about it is, imagine we have a doctor who's taking out someone's appendix. So when she's ready for a scalpel, she doesn't turn around and go look for a scalpel. She just says scalpel. And then when she wants forceps, she says forceps, and the system or someone behind her just gives her what she needs. So the idea in .NET Core is there's registered services, and when you want to use one in one of your classes, you basically just add a parameterized constructor, and the .NET Core runtime takes care of creating an instance of a service, on demand if necessary, and handing you a particular reference. Okay, now what we're going to do in exercise 1 is I'm going to open up this particular PowerShell script that's going to program against .NET, the .NET CLI. We're going to run the PowerShell script and create a new project. Sounds good. So let's go back here. And so I'm going to create a new folder, and that folder is going to be called user owns data. And then one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab 2 files, and I'm just kind of following along with what the lab is going to be telling you to do. So inside here, I now have this particular .NET Core project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this thing up, and I'm going to go ahead, and once it gets ready, I'm going to go ahead and remove the script, and we go ahead and run this, and lo and behold, my project directory fills up with files, because basically the .NET Core runtime is running. Note that we're going to get rid of one of the packages that was automatically added, and we're going to add this new package, which is called Microsoft.Identity.Web, and his little brother, which is Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. Okay, now let's go back here and take our particular project, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of open this thing up with Visual Studio Code. And now here is my particular project, and now I can use Visual Studio Code to start editing that. So basically that was our first step, which was basically creating the project. One other thing to note is you go through the lab, there are 2 essential Visual Studio Code extensions, the C# one for Microsoft and the debugger for Chrome. You can add whatever other extensions make you happy, but at a very minimum, add these 2 extensions, as you're doing this .NET Core development. Okay, so now let's move on to this other thing, which is basically the Microsoft, .developer or Microsoft.Identity.Web. Now, what this does for me is that it provides an authentication library. It's brand new. It's so new, it's not even released yet. So what is Microsoft.Identity.Web? It's a set of components and classes created by the Microsoft Identity team to assist web developers. So it's used to perform authentication in web applications and web APIs. It is not just going to implement the OpenID Connect protocol, but it's also going to make it very easy for you to acquire access tokens. And if that's not enough, it's going to add support to implement token caching, so that behind the scenes, when you get an access token, there's going to be refresh tokens that are automatically cached. When you want to get an access token an hour and a half later after your access token has expired, there's just code that's automatically going to take the refresh token and redeem it to get a new access token and hand it back to you. Now, a couple things to note. This is a library that's been built by Microsoft for .NET Core 3.1, that's what we're using today, and .NET Core 5, and it will be the preferred library. Now, it's currently in preview, and Microsoft is scheduled to release this, when it releases .NET 5. My best guess is in November of this year. Yeah. And I wanted to add a link down here just in case you want to go see. There's a wiki on the GitHub repo, where the team has their code and basically, puts their documentation. Now, why is this library good? Generally, I won't push you to use a preview component as I do these demos, but unfortunately, there's not a good pre-existing alternative. So let's say that I wanted to do the same thing, but before we had Microsoft.Identity.net. So many of you have probably moved from ADL to MSAL, to Microsoft.Identity.Client. And that helps you acquire access tokens and cache access tokens. But when it comes to actually implementing OpenID Connect, it provides nothing for you. So generally what you need to do is get middleware. If we were back in .NET Framework, I'd add both Microsoft.Identity.Client to get access tokens, and I'd add all these own components to implement OpenID Connect. And so what's really neat is that now all this gets replaced by Microsoft.Identity.Web, and the part that helps you implement OpenID Connect is the Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. Okay, now if we go through here, what we'd like to do in this section is to kind of go through what you're going to do inside of the lab. So let's kind of start by creating an Azure application. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to the Azure portal. And in the Azure portal, you can see that I've got 2 applications registered here. But now let's go back and we're going to go here. And there is this PowerShell script called create Azure AD application. I'm going to go ahead and open this thing up. And then I'm just going to put a number 2 in the application display name. So you can kind of see the difference between the one I've already registered and this one. And I'm just going to go ahead and run the script. And you can see that up top, it's calling connect Azure AD. So I'll go ahead and I'll log in as Ted P at powerbijdev.camp.net. And now that I have logged in, it should be able to run this script. Okay, Ted, do you remember your password? I think so. So it's going to run the script. And then when it's all done, it's going to spit out this text file. Now, let's go back here. And I'm going to go ahead and do a refresh. So I hate going and creating these things by hand. So the idea is that if we have a PowerShell script, let's go back and kind of take a look at it. My PowerShell script can create an application secret. It can then create the application and then kind of create this output file. But the idea is that after you run that, you have this particular file. Let's go back to our project now. The user owns data, and notice that when we created this, they gave me this file, but obviously they can't give me anything specific, so they had to kind of put some placeholder stuff. But the idea is that I can now just kind of take what my PowerShell script put out and put that right here. And now I've got what I need in the app.json. Okay, now let's keep going through with this demo. And once again, I'm going to kind of take you through exactly what you're going to do if you do the tutorial. So the first thing is to run the PowerShell script. It creates the particular Azure AD confidential application, and then it just kind of gives you a JSON fragment that you copy into appsettings.json. Okay, so good so far. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we have to make a couple changes. So back here, let's go to startup. And if I go to startup, one of the things that you're going to see is that there's an old library we got rid of. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And then I'm going to cheat here just for a second because I want to go down and get these using statements that we're going to take from here. Okay, so now I'm going to go down here. No need to remember this. There's step-by-step instructions. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go to this older place right here. Here's the library we got rid of. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to say add, and we're going to look for Microsoft.Identity.Web application. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of pass in the services, that we had inside there. No, not yes. I'm sorry. We're going to pass in the configuration object. And that's all you have to do to kind of turn on the authentication service. Now, there's one more thing that we're going to have to do, and that is we have to kind of register that we want the UI for OpenID Connect. So the way I'm going to have you do this, inside of this particular lab, let me just make sure that this thing compiles, is we're going to say var mvc controller equals, and now that we've got this particular object, I'm going to go down here, and now what we're going to do is we're going to add the Microsoft identity UI one more time. And at this point, what's kind of neat about this guy right here is that it registers an account controller behind the scenes. You don't even see it. Now, once we've gotten to this point right here, and we basically configured the new Microsoft.Identity.Web authentication service, and we've kind of registered it for the endpoints that are needed for OpenID Connect. Well, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the partial login partial, and what we're going to see here, and once again, let me kind of encourage you, if I'm here in Dev Camp, and then I go back here, and I'm going to go and just kind of grab this value from inside here. Okay, and now if we go back here, we're going to go into views, we're going to go into shared, and there's this partial view. And so notice that they're still set up for the older library that used Azure AD. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace it, and now there is going to be an ASP.NET area, Microsoft Identity. There's the account controller that's automatically registered, and now there's both sign in and sign out links. Okay, now just to get exercise 2 up and going, a couple other things that we're going to do is I'm going to make a quick change, into the controllers class. So let's say we go back to controllers, and what I want to show you here in controllers is that we're going to have 2 different pages. We're going to have index and we're going to have embed. Now, note that when you create a project, it automatically gives you index and privacy. So I'm just going to have you, instead of creating a new one, just take privacy that we're not using, and change that to embed. And now, we'll say something like, got here. But the key thing I want to show here is this notion of a secured route. And that is, when we authenticate the user, the MVC authentication system is going to know that. And so when you create a class, you can say everything in there, has the authorized attribute, meaning it's a secured page. You can't get there until you log in. However, one thing they do by default that I don't like is they make it so you can't get to the home page. So we're going to say allow anonymous to get to the home page. Now, there's 2 more things that I'm going to have to quickly replace here before I do this next demo. We give you some kind of pretty copy and paste code so that you can go to the sites.css file. And now we have some, very pretty CSS. And then also we're going to go into the shared folder. We're going to take the layouts. We're going to go ahead and get rid of that. And we're just going to replace layouts with our own code. Okay, and now let's go ahead and kind of see where we've gotten so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and hit the F5 key. And as we hit the F5 key, if it's the first time we've done something, it basically says, hey, you're not set up for debugging. Pick an environment. I'm going to pick .NET Core. And note that when you pick .NET Core, it automatically adds 2 essential Visual Studio Code debugging files. And the idea is that, now that we have done that, we should now be able to run this particular project. And, once we run this particular project right here, okay, something's going awry there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly move over to solution exercise 2. And now let's go ahead and run this right here. So when you get to the end of exercise 2, what we're going to see here, and now I think I have this running in multiple places. Okay, so there's a 101 error by Ted is, don't try to run 2 different sessions at the same time. Let's try it one more time, just so we can kind of get to where you should be. So here we have a sign-in link. And note that with the sign-in link, you can get to the home page and you're not authenticated. And then a user clicks sign in, we should be able to sign in and sign out. Also, I'm going to sign out. And one thing I want to reiterate here is, let's go back here. We've basically got these links to sign in and sign out. One other point is that inside the ASP.NET Core user, you can also take attributes. That's how I can say hello and reference the user by their name. Okay, but what we want to see here is we have 2 routes. And if you look at this code right here, what you can see is on the home page, it's very easy for you to write, some content for what the user sees when the user is not logged on, click sign in, and the user clicks and signs in and goes to that particular page. And what we should see there is that, now your code, can have conditional HTML output, depending on who the user is. The last thing I want to show with this particular demo is that if a user is not signed in, but a user clicks to go to a page that's secure, so right here, what we see is that, because this page over here, does not have the allow anonymous, you can't get there unless you logged in. But what's really neat is you can just provide a link. The user tries to get to the embed page, and ASP.NET Core just authenticates the user on the way, but still, does the courtesy of dropping the user, in that page when the user's done. Okay, so now that we've seen that, we've kind of seen getting up and going. A quick word about Visual Studio versus Visual Studio Code. What you'll see with these projects, let's go ahead and kill this project for a second. Let me go back here. And if I go to my solution here, notice that it's got a CSproj file. I can simply open that up with Visual Studio Code, or if I'm old school and I'd rather use Visual Studio, I can. And the only big difference between the two is that Visual Studio Code works with project files, doesn't care about solution files. With Visual Studio itself, you're going to have to select the project, and then after you select the project, you can basically do a save, and now you have a project file inside there. But the idea is that you are fine to start this thing up. And if you'd rather do your development with Visual Studio, instead of Visual Studio Code, that's up to you. Okay, let's keep going. So we're making some good time through here. And so now what we'd like to do is look at calling the Power BI service. Okay, so far we've authenticated the user, but the next problem we have to solve is leveraging Microsoft.Identity.Web to get access tokens. Now, there's 2 or 3 background slides here on the Power BI Service API. I'm going to go through pretty quickly. They're here for your reference. But the Power BI Service API is a REST-based API that supports OAuth and OpenID Connect, and it allows us to call into Power BI and automate things like uploading PBIX files or getting data for embedding. Now, if you're not using .NET, and you don't have a library that helps you, you have to kind of do the HTTP requests and handle the responses yourself. So here's an example of just kind of doing raw requests inside there. And you can see that, we're working way down at this level, creating HTTP requests, making the call across the network, and doing things like converting JSON, back into a C# object. So one of the things that we like doing if we're using the .NET Framework or .NET Core is using the Power BI SDK. And the idea is that your C# code will access this library that abstracts away you having to execute HTTP requests and convert back and forth between C# and JSON. So it's very recommended if you're using .NET. Now, also, the Power BI .NET SDK lives on top of the Power BI service. And we've gone through version 1, version 2, and version 3. And it's not the version of the underlying REST API down below. That really hasn't changed. It's just the .NET wrappers have changed. And so we really encourage you to move to version 3. So basically when you use it, you have a version that starts with 3 because there's lots of features that aren't supported in version 2 and earlier, like doing server-side generation of PDF files, or what we're going to look at the end of this session, which is working with multi-resource embed tokens. Okay, now in this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class named the Power BI Service API, and that's where we're going to write our code. We're going to leverage Microsoft.Identity.Web and the token acquisition service. We're going to call into Power BI and get the embedding data we need, and we're going to pass the embedding data to the report. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and move back here. And now instead of doing demos from scratch, I'm just going to open up some of the solutions that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the solution 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and create a new folder called services, and we're going to create this class in there, which is the Power BI Service API. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to use dependency injection to get 2 things. I want the configuration object, and the one reason that we like that, if I go back here, in addition to the Azure AD data, we've also put here the service root URL of the Power BI Service API. And the reason I've put this as a configuration option is that because when you program against the Power BI public cloud, that's the value. But if you're going against the government cloud or the German cloud or one of the other clouds, this value will be different. So I just wanted to make it a configuration value. So the first thing that we get by dependency injection is the configuration object. Here's the second thing we get, and here's where we're leveraging Microsoft.Identity.Web. I just want the token acquisition service. So I basically just create a variable based on the token acquisition service. I add something, into the constructor, and now I've got it. Okay. Now, if I go back to the slides for a second, the next thing we have to do is we have to go, back into the startup. And what I showed you earlier is we just use this one method right here, which is the first one. But now we're going to add two more things. Enable token acquisition to call downstream API. And notice that you have to pass some scopes. And then add in-memory token caches. So here's where Microsoft.Identity.Web is fantastic. If I just want to do demos, I'm just going to use the in-memory token cache. And the idea is it will cache tokens in memory behind the scenes. They also have things that you can use to plug into SQL Server and use a persistent cache. And once again, as they're creating Microsoft.Identity.Web, they're trying to take a lot of the pain, out of implementing token caching. Okay. And the second thing you see here is we're also going to say services add scoped, and we're going to take this class that we're creating, the Power BI Service API, and we're going to add that as a registered service. Now, a couple things that you'll see here is that if you look at this code, Power BI, when I get a user token, we need to have a set of required permissions or delegated permissions, so you can kind of see that, here are the permissions that my application is going to need. But at the end of the day, when it's time for me to get an access token, this token acquisition get token for user async, and you pass your scopes. Hey, how about all that, builder stuff that we had in Microsoft.Identity.Client? That's all gone. So what's really nice is it's kind of like Microsoft.Identity.Client sits behind this library, but this library makes it incredibly easy to use. So one of the things that you're going to see, is tremendous value in Microsoft.Identity.Web of solving some very difficult problems with an absolute minimal amount of code. Okay. Now, for our first example, we're going to call get report. And so what we're going to do is once we got this Power BI client object, we're going to call our first call from the Power BI Service API, get reports in group. We're going to take this data. Once we've got that method, we then go to the home controller. Now, here, we're using dependency injection. In the Power BI Service API class, I use dependency injection to give me the token acquisition service. And now in the controller, I'm using dependency injection, basically to get my class, the Power BI Service API, which then allows me to call this down here and get some data and basically pass it through. So once again, understanding dependency injection, how that works, is pretty key to mastering .NET Core development. Okay, now let's go back here. And what you can see here is we're kind of going in baby steps. So this time, when I look at embed, let's go ahead and run this application. I'm going to call across a network. I'm going to get data for one particular report, but we're not going to use JavaScript until the next demo. But here you can kind of see that I can get all that demo and at least present it on the page. So here's the data that we need. Okay, so now we're going to go up into the next part where we're going to bring in the client-side code and programming the Power BI JavaScript API. Now, when we start working with this, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to add some script links, and we have to add one script link to bring in the Power BI JavaScript API, which is powerbij.js. We're going to create a view model, to pass the embedding data to the browser, and we're going to write a little JavaScript code to embed a report. So I'm going to go ahead and now switch over. And if I go now to exercise 4, and let's go ahead and open up the solution to that, what we're going to see here is that now if I look at the embed view, you can see here a couple things we're doing. One is we're adding a link to the JavaScript API for Power BI. Second, I'm taking the values that we got from the call to the Power BI Service API, and I'm just creating a little JavaScript object on the page called the view model. And then after that, we have embed.js. So in exercise 4, is where you're going to go into www root, into JS, and you're going to add this file. So here's something that, if I look back here at the embed, here is like a div, which is the embed container. So step number 1, we'll get a DOM reference to that container. Step number 2, we're going to take the data from that view model. Step number 3, here's where we're starting to program against the JavaScript API. Notice that there's this little handy JavaScript object called models. So you can say things like models.permission.all. And then finally, we're going to call powerbi.embed. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this right here. And as we run this right here, now we'll go ahead and click embed. And now what we'll see is that it automatically is going to embed that report inside there. Okay, if I go back over here and now, inside of the console, if I basically look for the view model, you can kind of see that, here's the view model that we passed into the page, and our JavaScript code was just, able to read that. Now, let's do one more thing. What happens if someone, takes the page and makes it small or makes it really narrow? So another thing I'm going to have you do inside the lab is just add a little logic. So Power BI is really good about resizing an embedded report or dashboard as long as that container is moving. If your container doesn't move, you're not going to be able, to have your report adjust. But here, we're going to add a little code so if someone makes the hosting window bigger or smaller, it adjusts the size of the container, and the Power BI report, automatically adapts to doing that. Okay, so that's exercise 4. And you kind of saw the steps we went through. We basically created a view to add in the link to powerbi.js. We added the view model to the page, and then we added our JavaScript file and coded the JavaScript file, to basically do the implementation. Okay, let's take a breath. Now, we're going to really kind of spin our wheels and do something really neat, but a little bit complicated. So what we want to do is we want to add TypeScript support. So while I can program in JavaScript, it's going to be much better if we configure our project so that we can write TypeScript code. Now, when we do that, we're going to have to add Node.js support, and we're going to add a utility which is called Webpack. So here are all the steps that we have to go through. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I am going to move over to the solution for exercise 5. So one of the prerequisites as you're getting ready for this lab, is to, and let me make sure I open the correct folder, 5, user owns data. Okay, so what you can kind of see here is that we have 3 special files here. So the first one I want to look at is the package.json file. So when we use Node.js, and that's one of the prerequisites you have to install to go through this, it allows you to then bring up a command line utility. And so if I have an package.json file, I can call npm install. And what that's going to do is it's going to download a set of utilities. And notice that you have a node modules folder. I just ran that here just as a, for instance, here's the Node.js, and how big do those things get? They get really, really big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So when I leave my samples up for you to download, I would never leave the node modules folder there, but that means that the node modules folder is gone. You just have to do a npm install, and that automatically restores those files. Now, if I look up here, when we go ahead and do an npm run build, it's going to run this command called Webpack. Now, when you look at Webpack, it's a utility where you can say, what is my entry point? So in Lab 5, we're going to have you add embed.ts to the scripts folder. Find that entry point and basically put an output file of embed.js. Now, we're going to run the Webpack utility. And the way that you run the Webpack utility is if I called npm run build, that is going to run the Webpack utility right there. And the idea is if I go to www and I go take a look at this file right here, hey, that was generated by Webpack. And so if I go ahead and delete that file, and now one more time, we do an npm run build, what you're going to see is that file, gets created automatically on the fly, by basically looking at what's in scripts in embed.ts. Now, if I want to go a little bit further, I can also open the user owns data.cs proj file. So there's two build systems. There's Node.js, and there is also the .NET. So one of the things you could do is you could open up your CS proj, and this is something that gets looked at when you do a .NET build, but you can kind of see that I can add commands inside here. So now if someone does a .NET build, basically I'm having it call the Webpack utility, that's basically redoing that. And what's kind of neat about updating your CS proj file, is now I can go back, to this JavaScript file right here, and I can just basically add new code and hit the F5 key, and it automatically compiles into the JS file, before it loads in. Now, if I go ahead and I open up this application right here, now we have switched over to TypeScript. And what you'll see is when you go to, the final part of Lab 5, it's not really any different than the user experience for Lab 4, but we've moved from JavaScript to TypeScript. So for the developer, it's a pretty big step. Now, once you get to the last lab, we kind of have you build all this out. We're just going to have you make a couple changes, and we're going to give you some larger files. So back here, if I go to student files, in exercise 6, we're just going to give you 3 big files. We're not going to have you kind of code it by hand, but let me kind of show you, where we're going to get to. So what I'm going to do is let's go back here to the final solution. I'm going to open that one up. And as I open that one up, what we should see, is kind of the finished part of the lab, where when you get to the embed page, you no longer have to hard code in one report. So what's going to happen, let's go ahead and click here, is that you'll get to this particular place right here. And okay, for some reason it wasn't working as it should. Let me try it one more time so we can get this to work as it should work. Okay, and as this thing starts up right here, now we have the embed screen, and now, okay, somehow it's not working. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over just to the sample, which is the user owns data sample, just so I can kind of move through, what we're going to have inside this application. Okay, so when you get to the end of the lab, what you should be able to do, is have an app that has a user experience where you get to the embed page, and this one's not working either. What the problem? The embed URL is required but was not found. Okay, let me get back here. Sorry, my demo kind of hit a roadblock there. I'm not sure what I was doing wrong. But the main points here is the package.json file makes it a Node.js project. And then running npm install, gives you your project files. Now, one thing that's nice about Webpack is that Webpack adds dynamic module loading to your TypeScript code. So in embed.ts, you can say things like import star as $ from jQuery and import star, and we're going to import things from Power BI client and Power BI models. What's kind of neat about that is when it compiles the code and builds embed.js, it actually pulls code out of those other libraries. So now you're not going to need a separate reference to Power BI.js. It's automatically, going to be included in that file that's automatically built. Okay. And so I went through the steps of doing npm run build, and then also updating the user owns data project. Okay. And finally got to the part where we're working with TypeScript. And once again, the big benefit of working with TypeScript is we have strongly typed programming. So my variables are of type HTML element or view model or Power BI.configuration, or Power BI.report. So you just get a much higher degree of compile time type checking and IntelliSense, as you move to TypeScript. Now in exercise 6, I had you create the view model. Once again, I'm kind of curious why my demo stopped working. I might do one more quick test to see if I can get this to work, just so I can kind of demo that. I won't spend much time here. Okay, but now we have that. So if we go ahead and we run this, one more good faith effort to succeed with the demo. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and click sign in. Now that we've signed in, we'll get to embed. Okay, and somehow something broke there, but I'm going to be able to demo one more app that's going to show you the user experience. Okay, now with this case right here, here's what I wanted you to see, and it's not working. But the idea is that we're going to have a method that returns just a big piece of JSON. And as I do Power BI embedding, and I kind of worry about how do we make performance really good, we want to cut down calls to the server. So the idea is when we get to a workspace, we're just going to send one big payload of data over so that clients like code, can then open up reports, create new reports, but we don't require round trips to go back, and get more embedding information. And because we're using user owns data, the user access token from Azure AD, can be used to embed any report. Okay, now, two more things we want to cover. I want to show one more demo, but first I want to talk about the camper competition. So what we'd like to do, is we'd like to have all of you, work through this lab, but then to take what we've done and see if you can extend it further. Now, some of the demos I show you kind of add the ability to create workspaces and upload content, but I'm going to let your creativity, basically have you do what you want. But the idea is that if you create a application and you've got some neat features and you've been creative and you want to show things to the peers of yours, in the Power BI developer community, create a 3 to 5 minute video. And then there's a form that we're going to have you fill out, so that you can enter the competition.
Ah, okay. And that's on the community, right, Ted?
It is not on the community yet.
Okay, so
I'm pretty sure you will have me put on the community before too long. You will keep me in line.
Yeah, I don't know about that because I'm learning from you. You're the master here.
Okay.
But yeah,
well, that's good. I like people who are not experienced with keeping me in line. The best proctors we can have. I want to show one more application here before we quit. And that is, I've been looking at user owns data, but now let's go ahead and load in one for app owns data. So when we have app owns data, let's go ahead and make sure this thing can load in. What we're able to do here is when we talk to Power BI, to be able to talk, not so much, as a user, but as a service principal. And so if I click over here and and what is going on? I think there's got to be some issue with Visual Studio Code. So to try and save my demos here, let's go and open this thing up, this time with Visual Studio, so I can demo this. But what I wanted to kind of show here is, let's go ahead and make sure the application loads in and runs. And I want to kind of show, as we're working with the service principal. Okay, so if I go ahead and click on embed, and now here's kind of the application that we want, we're able to move through and do this kind of stuff. If you finish the lab, your application will look like this. So maybe a quick demo of, I can see all the reports, in my workspaces. Also, if I go to a report, I can open it up in edit mode, and I'm able to make changes, to that particular report, and then we're able to hit save and actually save those back. And then what's also cool is that if you have data sets you want to expose to your user, your embedded applications can create new reports on top of that particular data set. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's just add something, very simple here. We'll look at quarters. There's my report. Not a lot of area here, to work on reports. So that's why we have a full screen button. So now as a user is using my custom application to create reports, they're able to work with that. And now we'll do a file save as. And so let's go ahead and do a file save as. I created a report named Bob. And so I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Lots of guys named Biff. Let's go ahead and add the Biff report. But what you're going to see here is that we move from having a new report that's not saved in Power BI, and now the code saves it and then opens up the existing report inside there. So once again, that's the things that we want to look at. But if you've used app owns data, let's go back here, and first thing we'll do is we'll look at startup. And startup has that exact same code that we saw before, but we don't need to add the UI piece for the user to interactively log in. Now, when it gets back here to the Power BI Service API, what's kind of neat is that here, token acquisition, instead of get access token for user, it's get access token for app. And also remember that there's the value added aspect of, it's not just getting app only access tokens, but it's adding token caching. And what I see is a lot of people that do app only, they just get a new access token and call across the network every time they need one, which could be 10 times within a single request. So once you add the token caching, it token caches behind the scenes, and it just gives you the same token for an hour until it wears out, and then it gets a new one. So once again, that's pretty important. Now, the one thing I wanted to end with, we always like to end with like a nice beefy topic, and that is working with multi-resource embed tokens. Now, when you use app owns data, you don't pass the user's access token from Azure AD back to the browser. You pass what's called an embed token. However, early in the history of Power BI embedding, the API only allows you to create an embed token for one resource. But now, with improvements to the Power BI Service API and new support in V3 of the SDK, we can now create multi-token, multi-resource embed tokens. So here's an example. So here, once again, inside of my application, let's go back over here. And so if I now go and I look at a particular workspace, and I've got all this data inside here, let's go over here. And once again, let's look at this view model. So here is the view model that we're passing. And the idea is that if you can get all this data, onto the web page, and then your JavaScript code or TypeScript code can just take it and run with it, but we only need one token. And the idea is that I want to have this report, and then as I move from report 1 to report 2, I don't want to have to go across the network, and get a new embed token. So what this code allows you to do, and I guess I could step through the code here, and now when we look at this view model, here you can see that there's this class called generate token request v2 dataset. The naming completely sucks. We're sorry about that. V2 datasets are not available into V3 of the API. And in V2 of the API, there are no V2 data sets. Okay, so as long as you can understand that, you're fine. But the idea is that we create these V2. The idea is the token request, which are V2, support multi-resource, but the ones that don't have V2 do not. But the idea is that now what we're able to do is we're able to create a token request down here. Here's where we're generating the token. And so there are the data sets, there are the reports. And also, if I want to create a new report, you need to have the resource of the target workspace. But the idea is that now I can just basically create a single embed token. If we, go back over here, and here's where the demo is ending, I promise. And now let's go ahead and, bring that back over here. And now we're going to start looking at things inside, and once again, as we, look at that particular view model inside here, we basically have one token that we're using for every single report. And so once again, it just kind of saves you from calling across the network and just gives you a much better way to have a very performant application with Power BI embedding.
Awesome.
Okay, so what's our call to action, Kelly?
We've got a lot of call to actions here.
That is, so, as far as the call to actions, I'd say I want every one of you who, is willing to go through that tutorial. And, also, if you want to enter the camper competition, please do. I'd love to see lots of different entries. I'd love to come back next month and tell you we have 10 great 3-minute videos to show you of people that kind of took this idea and went further with it. And then also come back next month because we're going to have our second session on PowerShell. So with that, I am all done. And I think we have at least 75 seconds left. So Kelly, should I come back to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ted. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes. We've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. Love the session. Super excited about doing all of these activities. Okay, so first question. Does someone know if we can develop an MVP app with Power BI, but without Azure?
Yeah, there's no reason to have Azure. I think what you probably mean is the Azure embedding service for Power BI. But the example that I just showed, there's no Azure involved as you're doing your development work. We're just using Power BI Pro accounts to basically, because it's user owns data embedding. Now, if you want to do app owns data, then you're going to have to get a dedicated capacity, and lots of people will go to Azure and create instances of the Power BI embedded service.
Perfect. Okay, so does the row-level security work with the first version?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by the first version, but row-level security works with every form of Power BI embedding. Okay, great. So if you're using user owns data embedding, the user identity flows through, and row-level security on an embedded report works just like it did if that same user went to the Power BI service. Now with app owns data, because the user identity isn't propagated, you have to use something called the effective identity. So when you create an embed token, you basically embed the effective identity of the user, which includes the username and whatever roles the user is in. But you can absolutely, use Power BI row-level security, with everything we've talked about today.
Awesome. And can this talk apply to Power BI report server versus online Power BI?
Yes. So unfortunately, nothing we talked about today will work with Power BI report server. Power BI report server has a completely different set of APIs that are carried over from SQL Server reporting services. So unfortunately, everything we talked about is a cloud-only undertaking.
Okay, I did this with my Pro account. What are the limitations of this approach versus the premium license to embed the reports?
If you're using user owns data, there are no limitations. It only gets to be if you're doing app owns data and you get embed tokens. If you don't have a dedicated capacity, there's a finite number of embed tokens they will give you for doing things like prototyping. But once that number runs out, you're going to have to basically run your content out of a dedicated capacity, for it to work.
Excellent. With MVC and Power BI or SharePoint, can I do an editable table and being inserted onto the SharePoint list?
Oh, not in Power BI. So nothing there kind of relates to Power BI development. I mean, you could create an application with .NET Core, that did something like that, but we wouldn't use any of the APIs we talked about. We'd probably use the Microsoft Graph API, to create some kind of user interface into SharePoint.
Okay. So if the API is not updated or cannot be for whatever reason, is it safe to fall back onto the raw HTTP calls, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you want to call to the .NET Service API yourself, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Someone might say you're crazy. It's kind of like hitting yourself in the head with a hammer because it feels so good when you stop. But if you move over to another platform like Java, there is no SDK, so you have to make the raw calls. And there have definitely been times over the last 4 years where the SDK doesn't cover something that I know is in the underlying API. So we'll pull out HTTP client and we'll just do raw REST requests and have to deal with the access token. The code's not as pretty, but it has the exact same result, and sometimes it's necessary. So great question.
Okay, and what is the cost of ignoring the token cache and asking for a new token before each API call?
Well, the cost of ignoring token caching is just more round trips. Yeah, if you had an application with 10, 100 users, you might not ever notice it. As you start scaling higher and higher, if you have a request that is making 10 different calls to Azure AD each time a page is loaded to basically get the same app-only access token 10 times, it's going to hurt you with scalability. But when you code and you have scalability issues, if your user base is small enough, it might never show up.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of not optimizing, until it's necessary. But that's the issue. It's round trips and making your code more scalable.
For an app as a data owner implementation, what Power BI license is required?
For app as owner, you basically are going to, generally you're going to need a Power BI Pro license just to use the Power BI service and do things. But with the Power BI Pro license, if you're not in a dedicated capacity, once again, there's a finite number of embed tokens that Microsoft will pass back to you before it turns it off. The number is around 5 or 10,000. It's not a documented number, but after that, you have to get a dedicated capacity. You can get an A1 in Azure, which starts at $1 an hour. So it's a fairly low entry point. But what people find is that, can I use the free embed tokens for a prototype or for a certain amount of development? And it might be 1 week for one developer and 6 weeks for another developer. But at some point, if you're doing serious development, you also have to do your development, on top of A SKUs as well for dedicated capacities.
There's a couple of related questions. So can the custom reports be user specific with app-owned data setup? And are there any security concerns with the token being on the client as text?
So as far as can customer reports be user specific with app owns data? No. So there's a lot of things that Microsoft's coming out with, personalized visuals and being able to remember filter settings. And that's only going to be supported for user owns data embedding. But unfortunately, there's no plans to try and support that with app owns data. Okay. Are there any security concerns with the token being on the client as text? And if you're using user owns data, you're only putting the Azure AD access token on the desktop of the user that knew the password to get it. So that's not considered, a big violation. If you were doing app owns data and then you take a master user Azure access token and you pass that back, that would be a big problem. So with app owns data, you have to work with embed tokens. An Azure AD access token for someone that had admin privileges on multiple workspaces, that would be a huge security risk to pass that back to the desktop of 1,000 different users. So we don't do that.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Ajay's questions was completely answered. It's token resource on multi-source. Does a user get access to all the reports in the workspace? I think you did kind of partially answer that before.
Okay, so for AJ's question, token resource and multi, does the user get access to all reports in the workspace if your code wants them to? Mm-hmm. So the idea is that you can see every report and every data set and every workspace. And so when you build the embed token, you can put whatever resources you want inside of it. You could have a custom application where a workspace has 10 reports, but you only give a certain user access to 5 of those reports. And once again, what you put as far as resources in the embed token, is, your security. And even, so generally we don't like to do security by hiding a link. We want security, inside the embed token. So whatever resources you embed, the user can see with that embed token. Whatever resources you leave out, are secured from that user being able to access them. That's a great question, AJ.
Excellent. And then last question, is there a Java tutorial for Power BI?
Is there a Java tutorial? No, there is not. I spent a lot of time with Java in 1997, but I gave up Java when .NET Core or .NET came out in preview in like 1998, and I haven't done much work with that. Certainly, our team is working to build resources, for people using Java, trying to, create SDKs and libraries that help. But I don't foresee we'd have this type of a tutorial in the near future. So I apologize for that.
Okay, so I think that's all for the questions. Thank you so much, Ted. This was fantastic. I really encourage everybody else to go and complete the activities. And Ted, final words from you.
Yes, let's have everyone go out and complete that tutorial. Other than that, thank you, campers, for spending an hour with us, and hope to see you next month when we drill into PowerShell for Power BI. Thanks, everybody.